Okay, I think we'll move along from that presentation to chapter 2. I'll just take a couple more minutes, try to get through here. Tiberius is now the emperor, and he relies something on Tertullian here. In any case, his conclusion in chapter 2 is, Tiberius, therefore, under whom the name of Christ was spread throughout the world when the doctrine was announced to him from Palestine, where it was first communicated, with the Senate being obviously pleased with the doctrine, but the Senate, as they had not proposed a measure, rejected it. But he continued in his opinion, threatening death to the accusers of Christians. So he claims through the work of Tertullian that Tiberius was not against the spread of Christianity. Christian doctrine, chapter 3, spreads through the world. It is considered like a disease, and Paul is called a disease carrier in the book of Acts. And we get now the encounter of Paul with Cornelius in Caesarea. That's also following the book of Acts. We'll talk about it when we deal with Acts. And then the church in Antioch is the first flourishing church where Christians were first called Christians, and that's dealt with in Acts 10, 11, 12, and 13. And we'll talk about what Antioch is intended, the Antioch in Edessa or the Antioch on the Orontes. Most people think it is on the Orontes on the Syrian coast, and don't realize there were 4 different Antiochs in this one. So, in any case, from Acts, we get the point that Paul and Barnabas were delegated to take famine relief up to Jerusalem. Now, the famine relief episode at the end of chapter 3 here is an extremely important episode in Acts. It's also an important episode in Josephus. It's an important episode in, even in the literature of the Syriac church. And it's an important episode in the Talmud. And now we have an overlap here. 2 people are credited with famine relief. 1, Paul and Barnabas from the church in Antioch. 2, Queen Helen, called Queen Helen of Adiabene, who, according to Syriac text, she's the wife of Agabus, Queen Helen of Adiabene, and that's an interesting claim. She's the neighboring kingdom. Adiabene is right next to Edessa. One is by the Euphrates, the other is over towards the Tigris River. Adiabene is today's Kurdistan. So in any case, according to the Talmud and Josephus, she converts to Judaism. We've already talked about that. It's the same period here. And the problem is circumcision there. According to Josephus, there are 2 types being taught. One demands circumcision, the other doesn't. At the beginning, she follows the one that doesn't demand circumcision, taught by a man called Ananias, who also appears in the Agabus correspondence, and also appears as an associate of Paul in the Damascus conversion. The other is taught by a more zealot rabbi called Eliezer, who demands circumcision because Moses circumcised all his party in Genesis 17. So we'll talk about that later on. But however we see it all, both Queen Helen and the Paul group sent famine relief to Jerusalem. My conclusion in James is that Paul was among Queen Helen's representatives taking famine relief to Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas were among her people because it was people like Paul that first converted Helen, in my personal view. Ananias and Paul taught a form of conversion that did not require circumcision. Anyway, that's all very foggy, but it's something we can think of. Now we move over very quickly to a very important person, Gaius Caligula and Philo. Tiberius died, as we said, around 37 A.D. Herod's tetrarchy was taken from him and Herodias, meaning Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. And Josephus tells us this. Yes, that's true. Also Philo, a man very distinguished for his learning and still thought highly of today as an Alexandrian Neoplatonic philosopher. Originally he was a Hebrew, but he followed the sect of Plato and Pythagoras, and he surpassed all his contemporaries. That is true about the kind of philosophy Philo promoted. But he also had another book, chapter 5, called The Embassy to Gas. The Embassy to Gas took place around the time, around 40 or 44 AD, somewhere in there, when Caligula wanted to have his statue put up in the Jewish temple. And the Jews were horrified by this and begged and pleaded with the governors not to do this, including people like Pontius Pilate, for which they were slaughtered by Pontius Pilate. And meantime, the Jews hit on the fact that we can send an important representative, Philo from Alexandria, who's very well placed, very rich family, the son of what was called the Alabarch of Alexandria, and send him on a mission to Gas. That book survives. And Philo describes his mission to Gas to plead to Gas Caligula not to be so insane as to try to put a statue up in the temple. The problem is the second book of it, there were two books. The outcome has not survived. And if anyone could find the second book of Philo's mission to Gas, which we know he wrote, I think the world would be a much wealthier place. Because in the first book anyway, he says that Pontius Pilate was the most bloodthirsty governor in Palestine, and that he was actually recalled by the emperor because of his brutality and violence. The only governor to be so recalled. And of course now in the literature we're familiar with, including the present movies, we see Pontius Pilate as a quasi-saint. So there's something wrong here. And that's one of the things interesting that comes out of this, mission to Gas. Here it's summarized at the end of this section. First, then, he relates that in the reign of Tiberius of Rome, Sejanus, who was this violent freedman of Caligula, was then in great favor, or of Tiberius. He made every effort to destroy the nation of the Jews from the foundation and in Judea. Pontius Pilate, under whom the crimes were committed against our Savior, having attempted something contrary to what was lawful among the Jews respecting the temple at Jerusalem, which was then yet standing, excited even greater tumult. So he doesn't go into great detail about what Pilate did. But Pilate did a lot of things that encouraged revolt and unrest, and he was finally recalled, and that is in the mission to Gas. Pick up there next time. Turn her off. An exam, you say next Thursday? Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I don't think we're